Hare Krishna, welcome everyone. Good to see you all. Tonight we'll continue with our study of the Bhagavad Gita as it is by His Divine Grace, A.C.Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. Tonight we're continuing with Chapter 5, Karma Yoga, Action in Krishna Consciousness. And tonight we'll continue from verse number 13. And as usual, if you have any questions or any comments as we go, then please ask. Text number 13. When the embodied living being controls his nature and mentally renounces all actions, he resides happily in the city of 9 gates, the material body, neither working nor causing work to be done. So what Krishna is discussing here in this chapter, as we've discussed previously, chapter 5 is like an amalgamation of the philosophy of chapter 3 and 4. In chapter 3, we hear about karma, about acting. In chapter 4, we hear about jnana, knowledge, and now acting with knowledge. In other words, understanding our spiritual nature. So this verse is identifying someone who is acting on the self-realized platform, the platform of the Jivan Mukta. Jivan Mukta means someone who is self-realized. Jivan Mukta means someone who is acting on the spiritual platform. Someone who is understanding they're not the body, they're the soul, aham brahmasmi, and acting in a spiritual way. So Srila Prabhupada says in the purport for this verse, the embodied soul lives in the city of 9 gates. The activities of the body are conducted automatically by its particular modes of nature. The soul, although subjecting himself to the conditions of the body, cannot be beyond those conditions, if he so desires. Owing only to forgetfulness of his superior nature, he identifies with the material body and therefore suffers. So, someone who is a self-realized soul, a Jivan Mukta, a spiritual living entity, someone who acts like that, he doesn't identify with the material body. Here, the material body, it's also mentioned in the Bhagavatam, but also here. The material body is said to be the city of 9 gates. Paranjana Maharaj, also, this is spoken about in the Bhagavatam, but it's also spoken of here. The 9 gates of the body, as we know, the 2 eyes, the 2 nostrils, the 2 ears, the mouth, the genitals, and the anus, the rectum. These are the 9 gates. Body. And it is explained that we should keep these 9 gates illuminated. In other words, we should be very careful about what passes in and out of these 9 gates. In other words, what comes in out should be enlightened. Right? It should be spiritually surcharged. Because if we do this, then we elevate ourselves in our consciousness. If we don't do this, then we can suffer in this material world. So, Prabhupada mentions here that we need to become free from the identification of the material body. We need to become free from the influence of the 3 modes of material nature, which act upon the body continuously. As Krishna will discuss in the Bhagavad Gita, that the body should be enlightened and illumined by the mode of goodness. In other words, what we see, what we hear, what we taste, all these different things, it should be illuminated by the mode of goodness. And this will help us to become uplifted. This will help us to become purified in consciousness. So these are some of the teachings that we're given in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Srimad Bhagavatam in order to help elevate our consciousness. So, Prabhupada is emphasizing here that as long as we identify with this material body, we will suffer. Because the material body is meant for suffering. Right? You can get more suffering from the material body than you can pleasure or enjoyment. So therefore, we need to elevate our consciousness so that we don't become overwhelmed or overcome by the identification with the material body, the three modes of material nature. Right? So this is important that we elevate ourselves, that we understand our spiritual essence. Okay. Text number 14. The embodied spirit, master of the city of his body, does not create activities, nor does he induce people to act, nor does he create the fruits of action. All this is enacted by the modes of material nature. This is a very very powerful verse and very instructive verse, as are all these verses. Prabhupada says in the purport that the temporary body is the cause of varieties of activities and their resultant reactions. It is ignorance from time immemorial that is the cause of bodily suffering. As soon as a living entity becomes aloof from the activities of the body, he becomes free from the reactions. His best solution is to get out by transcendental Krishna consciousness. So, as Prabhupada points out, it is verified by Rupa Goswami, the Sindhu, that avidya means ignorance. Avidya or ignorance is the root cause of suffering in this material world. Right? Everyone is suffering in this material world because of ignorance. Avidya. That's what causes us to suffer in this material world. So how do we rise out of avidya? How do we rise out of ignorance? We rise out of ignorance by knowledge, by understanding our spiritual essence, by understanding our spiritual nature. So that's why the Bhagavad Gita is spoken. The Bhagavad Gita is spoken to the intelligence, the buddhi, right? Because we're meant to, by hearing the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita and by absorbing the transcendental knowledge within the Bhagavad Gita, we're meant to rise above the trappings of ignorance or identification with the material body. So it's very important that as devotees, we study Prabhupada's books on a regular basis and we hear the philosophy of Krishna consciousness on a regular basis so that we can rise above the effects of the three modes of material nature. So it is this ignorance, avidya, which binds us into this material world. That is the cause of our suffering. And as Krishna mentions in this particular verse, It is the modes of material nature that which affect us, and because we identify with the modes of nature. When we first fall to the material world, the first covering of the soul and the thickest covering of the soul is called ahankara. Ahankara means ego, false ego. So this ego, it covers us, it takes us over. And this ego, when it covers us, because of the identification which it causes, because of our misuse of independence, we identify with the ego, the false ego. We identify with the three modes of material nature. We identify with the material body. And this leads us to suffer in this material world. Therefore, we have to transcend the effects of the modes of material nature. We have to transcend the effects of this ignorance. And this is by cultivating knowledge and engaging our senses, Rishikena Rishikesha Sevana Bhakti Ujjate, in the service of Krishna by performing bhakti yoga. This will allow us to transcend and rise above the effects of the modes of material nature. So text number 15. Nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge. So, our sinful activities and our pious activities, they cover our ignorance, right? They cover our real knowledge. They cause ignorance. As Prabhupada says in the purport, that man proposes, God disposes. The Lord can fulfill all desires, and the Lord, being neutral to everyone, does not interfere with the desires of the living entities. However, when one desires Krishna, the Lord takes special care and encourages one to desire in such a way that one can attain to him and be eternally happy. So, man proposes, God disposes. It is because of our misuse of independence that we fall into this material world. And then we perform pious and sinful activities. Right? This is all because we chose to misuse our independence, and that brings us into contact with the material energy, and then we become implicated and we become covered more and more by this material energy. So Krishna does not interfere with the desires of the living entities. It's an important point to understand. You know, people sometimes ask, why is it that we have come to the material world? Why do we fall into the material world? Krishna is just facilitating our desire, that's all. Krishna didn't cause us to come here. We caused ourselves to come here, but Krishna, he facilitates that. Okay, you want to be independent of me? I facilitate it. I give you free will. I give you the ability to be independent. But as soon as we want to use that independence to come back to Krishna, Krishna facilitates that. Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagyavana Jiva, Guru Krishna Prasade Pai, Bhakti Lata Bija. Guru Krishna Prasad. The prasad coming from Guru and Krishna. Right? master, the spiritual master leads us back to Krishna. When we desire to once again approach Krishna, Krishna will facilitate that. In the Bhagavad Gita, he says, I direct the wanderings of the living entities. So when every living entity is desiring to go back to him, then Krishna facilitates that. So that is the power of devotional service. Devotional service allows us to come back to Krishna. So when we show a sincere desire in our hearts to serve Krishna once again, Krishna facilitates that. And he helps us to come back to him. He allows the living entity to approach him once again. And it gives opportunities to be engaged in devotional service once again. So that is the potency of bhakti, or the potency of devotional service. Text number 16. When, however, one is enlightened with the knowledge by which nescience is destroyed, then his knowledge reveals everything, as the sun lights up everything in the daytime. So, Prabhupada says in the purport that one has to seek out a bona fide spiritual master and under him learn what Krishna consciousness is. For Krishna consciousness will certainly drive away all nescience, as the sun drives away darkness. Identity with individuality in spiritual life is real knowledge. A very powerful commentary, very powerful purport by Prabhupada. It is by knowledge that ignorance is destroyed. Just like Prabhupada said that the banner head, or the motto for the Back to Godhead magazine, Godhead is light, darkness is nescience. Wherever there is Godhead, there cannot be ignorance. There cannot be nescience. So wherever there is knowledge about Krishna, wherever the Bhagavad Gita is spoken, at that time, at that place, then everything can be removed. So how do we receive knowledge? What's the most effective way? Krishna said at the end of the last chapter, the most effective way of receiving knowledge is by accepting the shelter of a bona fide spiritual master. Bona fide spiritual masters, gurus. It is the spiritual masters who give us transcendental knowledge, divya gyan, which helps us to uplift and to overcome the effects of the modes of material nature. So, what is it the spiritual master gives us? The spiritual master gives us correct siddhanta. In other words, correct teachings, which lift us up and above the modes of material nature. The spiritual masters give us knowledge of Krishna and that we are Krishna's eternal servants, right? And without that knowledge, we don't rise up to the transcendental platform. So therefore, we must hear from our gurus. We must take shelter of our gurus. This is the first point of spiritual life, as Rupa Goswami points out in the Nectar of Devotion. Ado Guru Pad Ashraya. Right? It is Guru Pad Ashraya. It is taking shelter of the lotus feet of the gurus. That is how spiritual life begins. That's how we advance in our spiritual practices, in our spiritual life. So we have to seek out, as Prabhupada says, bona fide spiritual masters. And by their association and by hearing from them, the darkness of ignorance is driven out, and one understands correctly his individual eternal relationship with Krishna and speculative knowledge, such as the Mayavad philosophy of thinking we are separate from Krishna, that is driven out. That is the potency of hearing from a bona fide spiritual master. Therefore, spiritual life begins by finding a spiritual master, surrendering unto them, right, and overcoming the effect of the modes of material nature under their guidance by their association. If we don't receive advanced association, we cannot transcend the influence of this material energy. Text number 17. When one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation. Text number 17. Prabhupada says in the purport, the whole Bhagavad Gita centers around the declaration that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One whose mind, intelligence, faith, and refuge are always in Krishna is undoubtedly washed clean of all misgivings and is in perfect knowledge of everything concerning transcendence. One can thoroughly understand that there is duality in Krishna. So, when one takes shelter of Krishna, Prabhupada says the whole Bhagavad Gita centers around the declaration that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So when one understands this point, he proceeds directly on the path of liberation. You become Jivan Mukta. When you accept that Krishna is the Supreme Lord, that's a very exalted state of consciousness. Right? Most people, if you look at Kali Yuga, if you look around us in this world, most people are not even close to having this realization. Most people do not understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Right? Many people believe in God, but to have knowledge that God is a person and to be very clear about who that person is, that's a very exalted state of consciousness for someone in Kali Yuga. Right? So, when we advance in Krishna consciousness, we understand Krishna is the Supreme Lord. And when you have that personalistic understanding that Krishna is God as a person, it clears up this Mayavadic misconception or this impersonal misconception, which Prabhupada calls the last snare of Maya, which is so prevalent in philosophy, spiritual philosophy in this modern world, both in the East and the West. So many people are confused about God not being a person. So many people have the understanding that God is not a person. It's very prevalent. It's very common in this day and age. So we need to spread this knowledge that Krishna is a person and to have that understanding. Right? So all these things can be overcome by someone who has spiritual knowledge. When someone understands Krishna's eternal supreme position, one can overcome all of this avidya, all of this knowledge. And then you can understand things as they are. That's why Prabhupada entitled his Bhagavad Gita as it is, so that you get the perfect, correct understanding. Otherwise, people, they don't understand what is the actual essence of life. It's very rare, actually. Brahmanda Brahmite, Kona Bhagavanaji. If you're very fortunate to come to this understanding in this lifetime, most people don't have this understanding about Krishna's actual position as being the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So if you do get that correct understanding, you're considered very exalted in this material world. So the next verse, which is verse 18 in the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, is a very famous verse. The humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with equal vision a learned and gentle Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog-eater outcast. So, text number 18, Prabhupada says in the purport, a Krishna-conscious person does not make distinctions between species or castes. This is due to their relationship with the Supreme, for Paramatma is present in everyone's heart. Such an understanding of the Supreme is real knowledge. The soul and supersoul are not equal. So, Prabhupada explains very carefully here that someone who is actually Krishna conscious does not see with distinction. Pandit Samadarshana, this verse says, famous verse. One who has knowledge does not see with distinction, and that is the avidya, or the problem with the modern world. That is the problem with the modern world. People, they don't see. People see with distinction. They see differences. They don't see the jiva. They don't see the soul, but they see according to the body. And because of the body, they think, just look. So many people, they are different to me. Right? They see the difference. This one is different. That one is different. Animals are different to humans in the sense that they can be exploited because they're inferior. They don't see the spiritual element, and then they exploit the animals. They exploit other humans, thinking there is a difference between all of us. So this is the materialistic understanding which is prevalent in this material world. So one who is spiritually advanced, he understands the spiritual nature of all living entities. However, he differentiates between the Supreme Lord, the Paramatma, and the Jivatma. Right? When we see everything is spiritual and everyone is spiritual and every living entity is spiritual, that does not mean that we are equal to God. That is the Mayavad misconception. Right? And many Mayavadis, they think like that. Right? They think that we are all equal. Myself, God, we are all equal. But Krishna actually mentions in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that the living entity is sthana or stira. Sthana means fixed. It means he's changeless. The living entity doesn't change. We're not supreme. So how can we become supreme if that's not what we are? However, many people think that, right? They have that misunderstanding. Oh, we are all supreme. We are all. No, that is a false understanding. That is a material understanding. It's an understanding based on enviousness. So we should not think. So this is the position of a living entity within this material world. He is forgetful of Krishna. And if he can learn the philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita and see everyone equally and see that I am the servant of the Supreme Lord, with that enlightened position, he can then transcend the effects of the modes of material nature and go back to the spiritual world. Okay, text number 19. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity have already conquered the conditions of birth and death. They are flawless like Brahman, and thus are already situated in Brahman. Prabhupada says in the purport that equanimity of mind is the sign of self-realization. Those who have attained such a stage have conquered birth and death. Krishna is flawless because he is without attraction and aversion. When a jiva is without attraction and hatred, he also becomes flawless and eligible to enter the spiritual sky. Such persons are liberated. So once again, Prabhupada makes many powerful statements within his commentary. Equanimity of mind is the sign of self-realization. If your mind is not steady, fixed, then, if your mind is not fixed and not steady, and is wavering, or if you're always a mental person, you're going from happiness to distress, and your emotions fluctuate all the time, that's not a sign of exalted consciousness or self-realization. So one way to see how advanced someone is how steady their mind is, how fixed they are, and how absorbed they are in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada says, if you attain that stage, you have conquered birth and death. In other words, if you understand your spiritual essence and you don't identify with the body anymore, then you have attained that state of consciousness which is beyond birth and death in this material world. So if we're always absorbed in, as Prabhupada says in the purport, attraction and hatred within this material world, right? Then we're flawed, right? If we're always fluctuating, oh, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm attracted to this, I'm averse to this, I hate this, I like this. This is not self-realization. Right? This is not the platform of spiritual understanding. This is a limited understanding. So therefore, we need to rise above this. As Prabhupada is teaching us, right? Self-realization means to go beyond the dualities of this material world. Heat and cold, happiness and distress, just like in Bhagavatam, the 5th canto, we hear about Jad Bharata. Jad Bharata had transcended this state of consciousness. So we also have to transcend this state of duality, happiness, distress, heat and cold, male, female, all of the dualities in this material world, they bind us to this material world. The sign of being self-realized is that one overcomes attachment to these dualities. And if we feel ourselves overcoming attachment to these dualities, this is a sign of self-realization. Okay. Text number 20. A person who neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant nor laments upon obtaining something unpleasant, who is self-intelligent, who is unbewildered, and who knows the science of God, is already situated in transcendence. So Prabhupada says in the purport, the self-realized person is not illusioned by the false identification of the body with his true self. He is therefore not joyful in achieving something, nor does he lament in losing anything related to his body. This knowledge elevates him to the station of knowing the complete science of the absolute truth, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. He thus knows his constitutional position perfectly well. Such steady consciousness is Krishna consciousness. So, as Prabhupada says, a self-realized person is not illusioned by the false identification with the body. Right? If you're always relating to your body, which is what everyone does in this modern world, everyone is always relating to the body. Right? The whole modern culture is based upon the body. Like people always taking selfies of themselves. This is something that I find very strange. That you take a photo of yourself and then place it on social media, right? Constantly focusing on social media. This is just bodily identification, right? It keeps one away from God, away from Krishna. So, to know the absolute truth means you have to know all the features of the absolute truth. Prabhupada actually says in the introduction of the Bhagavatam, the Bhagavatam is not about God. That is not the subject matter of the Bhagavatam. The subject matter of the Bhagavatam is understanding the absolute truth. Because there are different features to the absolute truth. And one who has correct knowledge, he understands the Jiva, he understands Brahman, he understands Paramatma, he understands Bhagavan, realization. And one who understands all these things, and he actually understands the absolute truth. So, one who knows this, knows his constitutional position perfectly well, he is eligible to become Krishna conscious. Right? One who knows himself. This is what the Bhagavad Gita is spoken for. So we know who we are. This is answered in the Bhagavad Gita. So we know who God is. We know the different features of God. Krishna says in Gita, Brahmano hi pratishtaham. That the Brahman, the spiritual energy, that is a part of God, but it is not God himself. This is the higher understanding. So when we become self-realized, we understand, right, our constitutional position. Your camera is on, Manju, just so you know. Might be good to turn the camera off. So we understand our constitutional position, Right? This is why the Bhagavad Gita is spoken, so that we understand, I am not the body, I am the soul. We understand how we relate to the Supreme Soul. So when you study the Bhagavad Gita, you understand this spiritual knowledge properly. Text number 21. Such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. And Prabhupada says in the purport, a person in Brahma Yoga, Krishna consciousness, is so absorbed in the loving service of Krishna that he loses his taste for material sense pleasure altogether. The highest sense pleasure in terms of matter is sex pleasure. So, in the Krishna book, Prabhupada explains what is a practical way that we can understand if we're advancing in Krishna consciousness and spiritual life. Because sometimes devotees ask this, am I advancing in spiritual life? Am I advancing in Krishna consciousness? How do we know? What's a practical way of understanding? So a practical way of understanding if we're advancing in Krishna consciousness is, are we losing our taste and our attachment for material sense pleasure? And the strongest material sense pleasure in this world is sex life. So if we are attached to sex life, as Prabhupada says in the purport, spiritual realization and sex pleasure go ill together. So if we're too attached to sex life, we can't understand our spiritual nature, and we can't transcend the three modes of material nature. So we have to see on a practical level. Sometimes devotees ask, how do I know I'm advancing? Well, how attached are you to material sense pleasure? In this way, we understand whether we're advancing or not in Krishna consciousness. Text number 22. An intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. Another powerful point by Srila Prabhupada. In the purport, Prabhupada says, those who are true yogis or learned transcendentalists are not attracted by temporary sense pleasures, which are the causes of continuous material existence. The more one is addicted to material pleasures, the more he is entrapped by material miseries. The mystics derive unlimited transcendental pleasure from the absolute truth known as Rama. So once again, right, if we're too attached to material sense pleasure, we can't advance in Krishna consciousness. So you have to look at yourself, right? If you're actually progressing in Krishna consciousness, then you will give up your attachment to sense pleasures. Right? It's very simple system. Text number 23. Before giving up this present body, if one is able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he is well situated and is happy in this world. As Prabhupada says in the purport, if one wants to make steady progress in self-realization, he must control the forces of the material senses. Goswamis live strictly controlled lives and forego altogether the forces of the life. One gives up this material body. This is self-realization. So we're encouraged to become Goswamis. Goswami means one who is in control of his senses. If we don't have control of our senses, we're not considered to be a Goswami. Right? So you must gain control of the senses, right? If you want to progress in spiritual life. You can't progress in spiritual life if you're always addicted to sense gratification, right? Sense gratification and spiritual life, they go ill together. Text number 24. One whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. He is liberated in the Supreme, and ultimately he attains the Supreme. Purport. A liberated person enjoys happiness by factual experience. He can sit silently at any place and enjoy the activities of life from within. Such a liberated person no longer desires external material happiness. This is called Brahmabhuta, attaining which one is assured of going back home, back to Godhead. So the Brahmabhuta platform, one is sure to attain self-realization. Brahmabhuta prasanatma na sochti na kankshati. If we understand our spiritual nature, then we do not become affected by the modes of material nature and overwhelmed by our material desires. Text number 25. Those who are beyond the dualities that arise from doubts, whose minds are engaged within, who are always busy working for the welfare of all living beings, and who are free from all sins, achieve liberation in the Supreme. And as Prabhupada says in the purport, to act to revive Krishna consciousness within the entire human society is the highest welfare work. One cannot be engaged in such first-class welfare work without being liberated in the Supreme. A Krishna-conscious person has no doubt about the supremacy of Krishna. He has no doubt because he is completely freed from all sins. This is the state of divine love. Completely free from all sins. Right? That is the state of divine love. That is the state of Krishna consciousness. We're all aspiring to come to that level. That's what our sadhana is for. When we practice sadhana bhakti, the goal is sajja. Sajja means bhava or prema, love for Krishna. How do we attain that? Then we need to associate with those who already have advanced sentiments in Krishna consciousness. And by their association, we become uplifted to the spiritual platform. And the final verse for tonight, verse number 26. Those who are free from anger and all material desires, who are self-realized, self-disciplined, and constantly endeavoring for perfection, are assured of liberation in the Supreme in the very near future. Purport. The devotee, although far away from Krishna's abode, can elevate himself to that abode simply by thinking of him constantly, by engagement in Krishna consciousness. He does not feel material miseries. This is called Brahma Nirvana, or the absence of material miseries, due to being constantly immersed in Krishna. So that is the process that the Bhagavad Gita speaks of. Savadamam Parijaja Mamekam Sharanam Braja, by the process of bhakti yoga, which is enriched by Vairagya Vidya, by knowledge of Krishna, by Vairagya, detachment from tasting the pleasure of serving Krishna, right? When one's bhakti yoga is fortified by knowledge and detachment, and you're focused on serving Krishna, you transcend this material energy, right? And you become qualified and eligible to go back home, back to Godhead. So that is the point. We need to focus on serving Krishna. Right? We need to understand our spiritual essence, that we're not the body, we are the soul. And if we come to that state of consciousness and we act on that in devotional service, that is the perfection of yoga. Right? That is the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. So we'll stop there for tonight. Does anyone have any questions or comments on what we discussed? Okay, thank you all for coming. We'll see you next week. Srila Prabhupada Ki.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Babu.
Thank you for coming.
Hare Babu.
See you soon.
See you soon.